it. Omar, let's do it. Is it
Let's do
okay
it.
if you kick off with introductions and I'll follow?
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, firstly, Amit, thanks for having us. So I'm Omar Chowdhury. I have the slightly grandiose title of Chief Intelligence Officer at 21st Group. So 21st Group are a sports intelligence agency based in London, and we support team owners and investors, competitions and federations, brands and media, and betting companies across a whole range of activities within sport. But I suppose most relevant for this conversation is I work with team owners and investors, and my route through to this business was originally starting off at Prozone, where Michael and I originally met, which was one of the early data innovators in football. And then joining 21st Group or 21st Club, as it was at the time, about 12 years ago now. And over the past 12 years, my role has really been focused on sitting between all the data smarts within our data science team and our clients. And as we'll get into it, I spend a lot of time working with clients, not just on the data bit, but also kind of the more broader operational practices and processes that hopefully underpin successful football club. So yeah, looking forward to speaking, well, I guess sharing experiences with you all today and also catching up with Michael, who I've not spent anywhere near enough time with over the last 10 years.
Stop it. Thank you, Omar. But the feeling's mutual. Real quick intro. So yeah, started off my career at Prozone, similar to Omar. Had the best time in that time, kind of working with teams on data and analytics, and then stayed in the sports technology space. Took a different path to Omar and spent 8 years at Catapult in terms of that kind of incubation of GPS technology and the high growth that's seen ever since, and the evolution of that type of business, which was amazing. And then I spent last 3 years working for Bloom Sports and building Bloom Sports Partners, a similarly grandiose title, Omar, but slightly more American in the vice president role. But yeah, we've got an advisory firm that is focused on basically finding, aligning, and developing talent and people within an organization, effectively making strategy and development of culture, and basically making sure that the right people in the right organizations at the right time. And absolutely loving what we're doing. The vast majority of our work is spread across the North America and Europe, and similarly to Omar is in the teams and league space, mainly in football, basketball, rugby, as well as ice hockey. So yeah, loving what we're doing. Fascinating space, and Omar and I, like Omar mentioned, worked together over a decade ago. Omar, I don't
Yeah.
know if we changed that much since. Who knows? People watching can maybe tell us that know us, but we've both experienced a lot since then, and I'm really excited to pick up some stories and some of the lessons from you of what you've experienced over that time. And yeah, let's kick off into the question. So I have one to kick us off, which is
Go
probably the main one. From your experiences, like in the time you've spent with these organizations, at the ownership, the leadership, and even at the operational level, like what are the well-run ones doing? And not just the ones with the money, but structurally you think are being really well run. Like what are the common patterns or themes you're seeing?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess and our business has been on a bit of a journey with that over these last 10 years. Like when we both joined the industry, I think there was definitely a lack of professionalization within European football in particular. And I think a lot of that a lot of clubs reflected on, okay, well, we need more data because that was the thing, right? 12, 15 years ago with Moneyball, etc. And that's played a part. But increasingly, I think ours and my reflection on the industry is there's kind of three or four broad things that really kind of make an organization hum. And the first is a sense of vision and what you're trying to achieve. And it's amazing, like, and you'll have this, Michael, as well. Like when you speak to clubs, quite often, whether it's an ownership or management, the vision is to win, and that isn't a vision. That's just like what everyone wants to do, and it gives you no sense of direction as to what you're trying to achieve. So I think the clubs that do that have clarity on like where they're getting to, what time frame it takes to get there, what's their mission, so i.e. how they're going to do it, and like what the objectives that sit beneath that, I think are are the ones that kind of set themselves up for success. And that comes from really good ownership that really understands how football works and the randomness of football, etc. And then from there, we think about kind of three core pillars that sit beneath that. The first is sporting intelligence. So understanding like what is a club's unique competitive edge. And quite often what we see is that a lot of clubs do a lot of things very averagely. So they do, a bit of recruitment here to an okay standard, a bit of player development here, a bit of academy, a bit of whatever it is, but no real kind of focus and attention to a particular area of developing the club's unique sense of IP. Because at the end of the day, clubs have finite budgets and finite resources, and so need to kind of focus in particular areas. The second bit, so sporting intelligence, the second bit is financial intelligence, like actually understanding what it costs to win. Again, I think people underestimate the randomness of football. You can finish 15, 20 points higher or lower than what you might deserve based on your underlying performance because of the role of it being a low scoring sport. And therefore, you can play well and lose and play poorly and win. So understanding that randomness, understanding how that interacts with the investment on the squad and how to take a long term view on it, I think is really really important. And then the third bit, and I think the realization, and I think this is the bit where we're kind of almost most kind of share similar thoughts on, is the operating bit and the operating culture. Like you can have a great plan around what you hope to achieve and what your competitive edge is and knowing how much it costs, but if you don't have the discipline on operating that and executing that plan, so many clubs fall over in that respect. And a manifestation of that is changes of head coaches and changes of sporting directors, etc. But the actual nuts and bolts, what's happening within the club is lack of clarity on roles, responsibilities, lack of clarity on how decisions are made, how decisions are evaluated and repeated, how systems and data interacts with those different things. And I think yeah, it feels strange for me to say that because my background, as people who may know me, listening in, like is a data background, but increasingly value the or really understand the importance of culture and discipline within these organisations rather than seeing data as a panacea. And I suppose the last thing I would say is that when you look at some of the really well football clubs, we can all think of them, but Brentford and Brighton are two of the ones that immediately spring to mind in this country around overperforming. I'm convinced, and certainly from the conversation I have in the industry, the thing that differentiates them is not necessarily the data or the IP that they have access to. It's the clear focus and discipline they have around using that information to make decisions, and the way in which they don't or do or in effect don't compromise on that is the thing that often differentiates them. And um, that culture can be really really hard to achieve, and like you'll know that better than anyone, really.
No, I think, yeah, even though we've not spent that much time together in the last 10 years or more, I think we're very aligned. I think just to elaborate on what you said, and I didn't have one of the elements you mentioned around financial pieces, but I think it ties in. I think that one of the ways to identify a well-run club is through our work that we would do. But even if someone was a CEO going into a club and wanted some advice, I think there's three questions you can ask, and you can quickly realize if you ask 10, 20 people in a football club three questions. One is what success look like in 3 to 5 years? And hopefully they don't just say we're winning or winning championships or a version of. The second one is like, how do you think you achieve that success? And again, having clarity on that you referenced that football intelligence piece, but knowing what differentiation looks like in the market and what are the bits that they're going to do to elevate or do differently and prioritize focus, right? Which comes to the financial resourcing element of you've got to pick and choose which battles you're going to have. And if you're mediocre at all of them, the likelihood of success is pretty slim. And the third piece is asking that individual, like, what's the responsibility they play in it? Are they really, really clear on their role in achieving that success? I think if anyone's listening and they're like, oh, we'd love to get a read, I think it's a very quick and easy thing to do is asking 10 people those three questions, and you'll walk away to understand where are the gaps, right? Which bits have we not got wrong? And it might be the upfront vision clarity element, or it could be actually that bit's clear, but the bit that we've lost sight of is people are not quite clear on the delineation of where they play a role in that. And the other bit, I think I've had a similar realization, Omar, is for a long time, sport has seen data as a bit of a silver bullet, right? Everyone's been on this kind of arms race for data. What's the new metric? What's the new model? Like, how do they find this piece? And just probably because of the focus and emphasis on that has taken their eye off the ball of the fundamentals of any business, whether it's football or not, is the people side, right? And how aligned are they? How engaged are they? Uh, yeah, how well cared for are they? Like, there's all these elements that which I think we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years, a big shift in that space. And it's not about one or the other; it's about both, right? And the data piece, the tech piece, and this operational element. Um,
Yeah,
okay,
I think so. And just I think so much of that comes from the top down. I don't know about you, but I see very few, if any, football clubs where they are kind of the values created bottom up in the sense of so much comes from from strong ownership, which is not common. Like if you think in other industries, management layers have are really important, and the kind of the systems that sit beneath them. But I think because of the nature of the types of owners that come into football, like ultimately you're not coming into football, yes, to make a return, but you're doing it because there are better places you can put your money, put it that way, right? And you're in it because there's you want a level of involvement, a level of feel that thrill, etc. And so owners are more involved. And like the analogy that we use is that they need to owners should play the role of almost like a film producer. Like they shouldn't be the director telling this is who you sign and this is how you set up a shot, etc. Like they should understand, how budgets are set the vision for the organization of the film, get the right people together, etc. And then like be able to kind of resolve conflicts as and when they come up, but sit on top of it. And I think again, like FSG would be a great example there. I think of really good ownership that's come in at Liverpool and been able to set the direction for the organisation and hire the right people and set the right culture. But they're not involved in the day to day in the way if they look across Stanley Park, the way like Farhad Moshiri was at Everton, where it was a completely different operating culture there and the right way ownership was set out. Now, like most people in school, maybe everyone in school isn't an owner of a football club, but they will at least, I guess, recognise that challenge, and it's difficult to influence upwards. But I suppose the really successful clubs do have really good ownership more than anything else.
yeah, I think I have a view on this, which is like there's two sides. There's two sides to making that successful. One is some owners being what you've got to try and get to is owners having some level of transparency of why they own a football club. And to your point, a lot of times it might not be a financial element, but it's just because they love the sport and they want to be involved in it, right? And just trying to get an owner to a position where they can be really open and honest about why they're involved and what's their level of involvement in the club day to day. Because I think it's something that leaders, whether the CEO or sporting director, they can't quite control that. The second bit is the success is going to come down to how can leaders manage the dynamics of that relationship? How well are they going to manage upwards and deal with some of the randomness, right, that may come from ownership? So I think the best ones would have ideally two things. Number one is the owners buy into strategy and buy into the discipline of the implementation of that strategy. So let's say, for example, they say they want to win championships as a version, but every 2 weeks they want to find out why is the best player not being sold. It's a great example, right? Of okay, what's the true intention of that? They might just want to play in the transfer market. They might just want to be involved because they like those big moments, right? It's then on the leadership's ability to either keep them disciplined to the strategy or manage the kind of fluctuations in those changing needs, right? But I think one thing I'm excited for is, and a space that I think, yeah, we've definitely been involved in a lot is trying to help CEOs or sporting directors figure out how do they get ahead of those questions and how do they, maximize those moments with ownership because there's a skill and there's an art to it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so I got a question for you, Omar.
Go on.
What are the bad things? Like, what are the common patterns of things you see that you get frustrated by? You're working with a team or an organization. You're like, oh, this again. Um, what do people get wrong? And particularly with the structure, right? Like the things that anyone can take away, irrespective of size of organization, like the structural piece. What are some common things that you see that you're like, we're here we go again?
You mentioned silver bullet on data, and I think football's got silver bullet syndrome in the sense it's not it can be data, but sometimes it can be we just get the right head coach, or if we just sign this number nine, or if we just solve our injury issues, etc. And it's like seeing this one thing as a panacea for all the ills at a football club. And actually, you know, a football club is an aggregation of lots of things coming together, and you can't control all of those things necessarily, but you've got to recognize that it is lots of things. And actually, in instances where you do have someone who comes in and completely changes the landscape, that's a reflection of a bad, a poorly run organization, and actually can paper over a lot of cracks. So yeah, I think when we're brought in to, I guess, look at individual decisions, that's where I guess where we come in and try and say, well, actually, have you thought about the broader thing? And like quite often when we're involved in a head coach hire piece of work now, it's to go, okay, yeah, you're not where you defined your vision or objectives to be, but let's look at your last six head coaches. They all had the same points per game. You change them every 18 months. There's no reason to suggest that this next change could be any different to each of those things. And actually, each time you hired those coaches, you thought it was going to be different. So I think that's the thing that it's like you take a step back and you go, okay, well, there is something fundamental that needs to change here. And that again, it comes back to ownership and their perspective on it. But yeah, it's kind of recognizing that things take time. You need to take a 3 to 5, probably more year view on things. The way in which we articulate to clubs is, per your point around objectives, it shouldn't be we need to finish, you know, in the European places every year. It's like, okay, 4 years out of 5 or 3 years out of 5. How do you think about that randomness? How do you tackle when you have a bad season, and evaluate the coach, etc. So I think that to me would be the number one. But I'd be curious to hear yours.
You're gonna get me my soapbox, aren't I? I think one of mine is I'm not sure it's unique to football. I think it's somewhat unique to sport though, is people that know me will know this, something I'm very passionate about, Omar, but is if you think about the structure of a football club and people in management positions, so they're typically responsible for pretty big pretty big teams and lots of resource, financially, but also in people. I think one thing that football's got wrong and sports got wrong in the past, and it is definitely getting better, but is it promotes people because they're very good experts at a topic. So they're good recruitment people, right? Good analytics people, good performance people. But then they have to evolve into a different role. Being a leader or a manager in a sports team is so different than being the physio day to day treating players. And that journey and clubs helping people on that journey. I think the more mature ones, the better well run ones care about helping people on that journey. The ones that are not that well run let people sink or swim. And I get it. Like the allure of the moment of being promoted is they get paid more money, right? They get more responsibility. It's the obvious path. But I still think football's not what quite got right this opportunity for a member of staff to either take an individual contributor track. So why not let a physio just become the best physio in the world and do the best job they can do for your organization? Why do they have to manage people? Why do they have to lead people? And I think if a lot of the work that we do when we kind of get involved at reviewing organizations, particularly on the sporting structure and the people and the processes, a lot of it just comes down to the people don't want to manage, really. It's not a passion, it's not something they're interested in. They're doing it because they have to do it, because they want the bigger paycheck, they want the bigger house, right? I get it, like as an evolution of human. But I think football clubs got two opportunities here. Is one, being careful about who they promote and making sure that that person wants that management piece. And the second piece is just helping them on the journey. Because I think a lot of the symptoms we see stem from that, which I think is interesting, right? But it's also very solvable, like very, very solvable.
Yeah, you'll know this better than me, but it always strikes me that roles are pretty ill-defined within clubs as well, which is probably part of the problem, right? When someone is getting promoted, it isn't actually clear what are the expectations as part of new roles, and even for like quite important roles like sporting director, clubs often think they want one thing, but actually they need another, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, I think expectations is a very good theme. I think it stems from the original one we spoke about around ownership, right? Them setting expectations of their organization, what they want to achieve, expectations about how they want to be involved, but that should kind of go through the entire organization. And yeah, I think when people are promoted, there's always this balance of we want you to still do that, but manage people, and depends on the size of the organization. But I do think that's one thing I would love football teams, but the industry in large is to be better at. Omar is helping people become better managers. We've all experienced good and bad managers, right? It makes a world of difference in how much you kind of give every day, how much you feel like you're developing, how engaged you are, like how good of a job you do. It's got a massive, massive opportunity to scale up your organization and improve. And so yeah, that's my soapbox on that question.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
Um, do you think there is a world for a bit of chaos and a bit of instinct still? So we talked about a lot about structure. We talked a lot about like processes. There's an element of sucking the fun out there, right? So like, do you think there's
Yeah.
still a world of where there's chaos and instinct has got a place to
Yeah,
play?
it's funny. I reflect on this a lot. Just like because we do a lot of work with competitions and federations, and like zoom out and think, well, ultimately this is an entertainment product, but an entertainment product with authenticity because it's got sporting integrity, etc. And you do look at some sports and you go, actually, the kind of uber professionalization of the sport has sucked some of the fun out of it. So there's, again, I'm not an expert on this, but in basketball, certain types of you know, shots from certain range have disappeared. In golf, suddenly driving's become the thing, and you have kind of people who just bombing it down the fairways has become a particular thing. There's been an argument in football that actually, prevalence of XG, etc., has taken the fun out of people shooting from range and like diversity in playing styles, etc., and even set pieces more recently, like everyone's kind of cottoned onto it. So yeah, there's an argument that the kind of uber professionalization of sport actually dilutes the product, certainly dilutes diversity in the product. But as it relates to winning and being in a club, it's a good question. I think I would. The danger with chaos is, I guess you want organized chaos rather than, you know, uh, total anarchy. I think you want people to be able to kind of. We often talk about that freedom within a framework. So you've got certain things that you're trying to achieve as a club, or certain principles by which you live, and as long as you're living those each day to day, then you can live by it. But yeah, I guess I thought about more about from a kind of sporting entertainment perspective. But is this one that you've got a particular view on?
Um, I think I guess I do. One space that I think, and maybe it's not chaos, but like more instinctive, is what we're seeing around football clubs is like, and particularly the role of a sporting director, Omar, and you're starting to see co-sporting directors more than ever before, and kind of the creativity that we're seeing in how leadership teams are being structured. And I think what we're finding is there's definitely profiles of people within football that like what we've been talking about around like strategy, process, like the kind of boxiness of it is just not their comfort zone expertise, but also just not like enamored by it, right? And I'm not trying to put people in boxes, but I think it's just some of the clubs that I'm seeing I really like is they're just being self-aware of that. Because there's some people that are not brilliant at that piece, but they're brilliant at the magic moments, right? The deal making, like this, like to your point, they've got freedom within the framework. So it's not like the Mavericks or Renegades. They're not just doing randomness, but you still need those deal makers that understand the art of that element of being that role of a sporting director. But their ability to recognize that, or the organization's ability to recognize that, and then build out compatibility around it to bring some of that more rigor and process. I think that's a recent evolution in football. And I think that's one that, yeah, I'm personally excited to see how that evolves. And are we going to see singular sporting directors? Are we going to see three or four people overseeing a sporting department of a football team? What are those potential structures? Like, I think that's quite an exciting and opportune space.
Yeah, I'm always wary of organizations like us sometimes being a bit computer says no on things, where we've got a particular data point or piece of analysis that we do, and it kind of goes against what someone's instinct is. I think where what good organizations have is they understand the rationale behind the decisions they've made, and they're able to kind of create the feedback loop that reevaluates it. I had a conversation with the club this morning. Was asking that particular question, like when you have a bad signing, do you understand why it was bad? Do you understand like what actually contributed to it, or do you at least interrogate that? And most clubs don't, to be honest. And so I think if you do allow, as you say, some of the more you know not chaotic, as you say, but kind of more instinctive, etc., types of decision making, at least have an ability to come back to it, review your notes at the time, and then process it. Which is how we would make decisions in everyday life, right? But in football, I guess because there are so many big decisions, you can sometimes get lost in it.
Yeah, no, well said. Did you have any other questions on my coming into this? Appreciate I've been driving.
Well, I was kind of curious on, I guess, to dig into a little bit more of culture. Like, we talk a lot about what makes a successful or why a successful organization needs a good culture, but like, what actually is it in your experience that underpins that? Because I guess culture find different ways, but ultimately it's like repeated behaviors, right, within an organization. So how is that embedded in your experience? Like, what are the key pillars to getting that right?
Big question. Don't know how much time Amit's going to give us for this one, but we'll try. Um, so I think there's a few things. I think number one, thinking that it's fully controllable is a mistake, particularly for an organization that's got a history. So thinking you can come in and just completely revolutionize the culture and completely change from what it was to what you want it to be. I think that's a naive approach. So I think one piece is like the history of the organization. There's always elements that you've got to try and parse out around what does the club stand for, what has made it special in the past. Maybe that's been diluted over time, and it needs to be brought back. But the second piece is so that's recognizing the past of an organization and what the culture of that club looks and feels like. But I think it's about having intentionality on it, Omar, right? So as a leadership team, I think there's a few things you can do. One is being able to describe it together. Like, what are those repeatable behaviors? What are the scenarios you want to see play out day to day? And how do you incentivize them? They can be incentivized. Um, so is it rewarding certain people that just rewarding individuals that epitomize that? Storytelling. So like one of the things we see around like core values, when we do core value sessions, like I love it, the stories that come out from, and you've got to include players, you've got to include staff, but the storytelling element and making sure that real life stories that people know, yeah, the stories that people know are reshared but reframed with the culture and core values in mind. And then I think one thing like I'm definitely passionate about, and I think as an organization we're really passionate about, is like I think you can measure it. I think there's different ways to do it. Like we've built a version of a culture diagnostic, Omar. So the ability to survey and question staff and players around culture and get a feel for their level of engagement in it and their description of it, and using it as a bit of a leading indicator of where you're going. Because I think if you, from the work we've done, you'll definitely see that dip on a measure level, particularly for leaders if they're not in busy windows, in busy periods, like they can't always get a sense of it sometimes. If the leadership team is so busy that they're not keeping a sense of it, it forces that. So having an objective measure of where are we at as a benchmark? Is it going up? Is it going down? How do we compare to other high performing teams in the world? So yeah, I rambled a little bit there, Omar, but I think there's definitely lots
Yeah.
of you can do to guide it. But it's a very nuanced space. I also think there's an allergy to the word culture, and
Mm.
I think that's completely fair because it can feel soft and fluffy and elusive. Um, but I think there's an education piece we've all got to be better at to help people understand it.
Yeah. And I think just like with any uh, other type of aspect within the club. We see this a lot within football. That there's a lot of football clubs suffer with key person risk. So you've got individuals who hold a lot of knowledge in their head or a particular skill around negotiation or sport, whatever it is. And I think that's where culture can be your superpower. Initially, maybe you've got individuals who are those kind of culture carriers within the organization that try and embed it. But ultimately, if you can get to a stage where everyone is speaking the same language, etc. And like some of the most interesting organizations that I see in sport, they're almost like cult-like in the way in which they are passionate about doing what they do. So, like a couple that come to mind would be the Right to Dream Group, who have a kind of an amazing set of academies and first teams in Denmark and US now, and academies Egypt, Ghana, and Denmark, and soon to be US. When you spend time with that organization, it is a little bit like a cult, in terms of their belief in developing and giving young players a go. And that takes a lot of time to embed, and you hire the right people. But ultimately, like when people start have relationships, connections with the organization, they're slowly able to kind of articulate it and speak the language. Provided it's the right culture, then it's really good. You get other clubs where the culture gets into a negative spiral where it's all moaning about the same old things, etc. So yeah, that's where I'm with you on this. Like historically, I'd have been part of the silver bullet school of like you just get your data in or just get your head coach right and you sort it. But now like it's that foundational bit that I think really differentiates a lot of these organizations.
Love it. I think we might be at time.
We've got a question I can see.
We're starting to get questions, Amit. You guide us.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Michael. Yes, we have one question. Michael, it would be better if you read it.
Got it. All right. So we've got a question from Charlie. You've both spoken about different roles within football teams. What specific role or job title from another sport or industry would you like to see emerge in football? What value do you see that role bringing? All right. This is
I think I'll let you take that one first. I'll have a think.
Yeah, so I'm going to plug one thing and then I'll answer it. So, for the last 2 years on LinkedIn, we've put like a bit of a list together of roles we want to see emerge or we predict are going to emerge in sport. So definitely check them out. I can point people in the direction of them. Um, I think one that I would love to see, and it does exist, but in very, very small pockets and not that much in football, is and bear with me, is a role that's dedicated around HR within the sporting setting. So one of the things that we see a lot of is HR teams typically sit in the business side. So they're typically sat in the stadium. And then this is not for all of them. So like I don't want to overgeneralize, but the idea of what should a head coach's contract look like, or what does a VP of performance look and feel like, it can feel a bit alien because they're typically coming from space of business and other parts of sport. So I think having some type of people, culture, HR function that sits within sporting, I'm fascinated by. So there's a few examples in Major League Baseball. So if you think about the size of those organizations and the number of staff and the contracts they've got to do, basically from the major leagues, minor leagues, and obviously kind of the farm system that they've got. Yeah, there's some amazing characters and people that have got that role, and I think football could be a space where we should see that. So it basically brings the challenge we spoke about, Omar, like making sure roles and responsibilities exist, like making sure culture's thought about, um, challenging hiring managers on compatibility versus just being the best people. Um, yeah, I'm fascinated by that space. So that would be the one that I would thought vouch for. But Omar, what would yours be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as close to this as you. You're much closer to the kind of um, staff recruitment space in clubs. It, you see, yeah, I mean, you see certain organisations kind of hire a head of innovation, which can be a bit of a, I don't know, for want of better phrasing, excuse my French, but a bullshit term, really, within a lot of clubs. But I do think the way in which technology is developing, clubs will need that type of role because invariably technical staff and analytical staff within clubs are just so sucked into the day to day, like constantly responding to the latest requests and latest problem, etc. So I think someone who can kind of get their head above it, understands those problems and how new technologies can help resolve those, I think is going to be kind of a big unlock for clubs. Because yeah, the day-to-day culture of clubs makes it very difficult for people to get their head out of just doing the next task in front of them.
Love it. What before we jump to the next question, what do you think about ahead of AI? What would your view be on?
I think most clubs aren't don't even have their like house in order to like take advantage of AI. Um, the data infrastructure, documentation, technology, etc., just doesn't exist. And so if your head of AI is going to come in and solve that, great, but they're going to spend the first 12, 18 months solving that first, which is fine, but don't expect them to be delivering kind of AI solutions anytime soon.
Yeah, but it's getting ahead of it, right? Like if they can get ahead of it in terms of, to your point, structuring data, organizing it, making sure they're ready that as that space evolves, they've at least got the house in order to maximize the use of it. But I get excited by that space. It's still very early. You've got Stuart at Reading, right? Who's I think the first in English football, and yeah, no pressure, Stuart. But I hope he does an amazing job, and yeah, other clubs will follow. I think we've got a question here, Omar. Definitely one for you in my mind. In the data world in a football club, what are the main ideas you try and present to the technical staff when you're recruiting a player, assuming that player fits into the club's way of playing?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I see in the kind of presentation of data on players and recruitment is just kind of graph vomit. So it's like radar here, bar chart there, career history here, kind of some scouting data word clouds over there, and it's just like, oh God, how do I make any kind of sense of this? Like, so yeah, ultimately, like it's kind of a pyramid principle approach. Like, try and start with the answer and then provide the detail that sits underneath it. And the answer, in my mind, should always try and be a prediction around the player, and it should be we expect this player is going to add this many points per season to us, or increase our chance of survival, Europe, whatever it is, by X%, and always be clear about how you've calculated that, the parameters that go into that, and the uncertainty that goes around it. But that to me, if I'm a chief exec or director of football or an owner, like that's ultimately what I want to be seeing. Like in some ways, I don't care how what goes into making that number up, but like knowing that there is some process to get to that number, and you'll clearly have to do some work to get to it, I think is really important. I think a lot of clubs lack that clarity, which comes back to what we are discussing earlier. Like if there isn't the clarity in what the club's trying to achieve, then it is hard to come up with that number because you know, are we just buying players for the sake of buying players, right? It's got to be more than that.
Yeah. I'm going to follow up with another question that's related to a similar space, Omar, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So we've got a question from Adriano. What do you think is the next bit of innovation when it comes to recruitment of players? With everything happening in the market, what do you expect to be the next big thing in 2 years from now? Great question.
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously, head turns to what we talk about with AI and the technologies that will unlock. I think the ability to kind of scale data across all kinds of different markets and leagues and etc. will mean that suddenly you've got an ability to kind of look in places that were previously difficult to scale your recruitment operations. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's difficult to put a pin on it. What another one would be the kind of human, softer side evaluation, which I think again will technologies will enable clubs to scale. I think what to the point earlier, I think clubs will need to almost choose like what lane they might want to specialize in the future to do it well. So if they believe that there's real value in skeletal tracking data and being able to understand player positioning and injury rates and all the kind of stuff from that, then go for it. But you're gonna have to spend a lot of time and money investing in that, and then therefore don't try and cover off gaps in other places around looking at new markets or trying to do certain predictive things or whatever it is. So it's like I think that level of focus is what clubs will need to do because there is going to be a proliferation of different things that clubs could look at.
A bit of follow-up question to that one is, do you think that as the maturation of data and analytics and the commoditization of the ability to find players, right, has kind of evolved, do you think there's like an opportunity for clubs? So let's say, for example, 5 teams going for the same player, their ability in that moment to draw that player in. So a reputation like a Right to Dream or a Brighton of their ability to want to develop that player, give them a platform to play, demonstrated past of that. I know that's not quite innovation speak, but do you think there's going to be an arms race of that element?
100%. I mean, we're working with a club, Premier League club at the moment in their academy, and in the academy space, the recruitment is kind of aggressive at the moment in the UK because of the nature of Brexit, not being able to recruit EU players at 16, 17. So suddenly, the aggressiveness for English talent under the age of 18 is huge. And therefore, the differentiation is speed and not just speed of ID, but speed of execution. So it's like we've identified this player, ability to move that up the chain in terms of position, bring it back down to recruit the player. Like that is a big competitive edge that clubs can have. And then, yeah, the ability to attract them. So yeah, I think that's such a good point. Like the kind of democratization of and commoditization of kind of data means that would be a big one. I can see. I mean, I can see all the questions here. So maybe I'll
I think
go.
AJ's been waiting a while, Omar. So maybe
Yeah, and I think that one's for you. Let me read it out. So for clubs
go
that
for
don't
it.
have massive budgets and where regulation, league and or otherwise doesn't incentivize investing in people, how important is it for CEOs to be generalists rather than specialists? Or are you seeing the death of generalists in football?
Great question. Um, my view on that is it depends what we mean by generalists or specialists. So I think a specialism, there's always in a recruitment process for CEO, they're always trying to solve for something. Okay. So there's always going to be a slight lean or bias of do we want a commercially focused CEO? Do we want a football focused CEO? Do we want them to come from a certain space? Do we want to be brave and try something different? Do we want them to come from media or like there'll always be a slight lean. So I think that specialism is a bit of like a USP for the particular candidate. And is that a match? But I think there's still space for generalists. They just need to know how to position their specialism, their fit. But ultimately, I think the leadership and management piece of can this person deliver what we're trying to deliver, show evidence of being able to do that in the past, um, meet us where we're at as well. So, like, have they been in similar environments in terms of style, pace, size, and taken them on a journey in the past? And have they got evidence of that? So, I definitely think there's space for generalists. I think every club will always have a specialism in mind, and sometimes this is where or the role of someone like us would be is like if they've had something else in the past that didn't work, the knee jerk is to swing the other way. right? And you'll see this, Omar, in recruitment of players or in other spaces, right? But like just this want to go, we had a more football focused one. We want a non-football person. Okay, why? Well, with the football person, that didn't work. I'm not sure that's why it didn't work. So you've kind of got to get under the nub of that. So yeah, I still believe there's a big kind of opportunity for generalists, but I think you do have to get your USP and specialism nailed and know how to position that. And also have an eye on which are the types of clubs that are going to be the ones that want that.